Hi there. In this lecture we see Alekhine playing against Capablanca in the New York 1927 tournament, round 5. So this is their last tournament game before the World Championship match later that year in 1927. So perhaps there are some conspiracy theories. Perhaps Alekhine didn't really want to play his best game. He wanted to secure the World Championship match to give the impression, perhaps, this is conspiracy theory, that maybe, Capablanca is the clear favourite, doesn't have to do much work necessarily to beat Alekhine. Alekhine is just, a bunny. So let's have a look at this game. D4 from Alekhine. We have knight f6 from Capablanca. C4, e6, knight f3. We have Queen's Indian territory basically here. G3, bishop b7, bishop g2, and now c5. This navigates it to a modern Benoni pawn structure, which was a favourite of Mikhail Tal. White indulges d5, we have e takes, and now knight h4. So this pinning the pawn means that actually, the knight also sometimes threatens to go to f5. That is extinguished, and we essentially transpose into what could have, come out of a modern Benoni. After bishop f4, d6, c takes, d5. As with, modern Benoni, we have the queenside pawn majority. We've got the semi-open e-file. We can often work with the e5 square. From White's perspective, d6 is, sometimes weak. And, so there are pros and cons here. We see knight h5, bishop d2, and now knight d7. In this particular situation, against this fianchetto setup, d6 doesn't really look like an easily exploitable weakness. In fact, Alekhine indulges f4. So, this is a really kind of risky committal pawn move. Kind of more solid would be rook e1. This position, White should be able to claim a small edge. But with f4, things start to get kind of committal for White. A6. And we have here bishop f3. You might wonder, what about a4? That's usually played, isn't it? In Benoni type positions. Yeah, a4 could be played. And for example here, h3. The thing is, in this particular scenario, b5 can be played. For example, a takes, rook takes, bishop takes, knight takes, queen b6, and black has significant play in this particular position. For example, knight c3, c4 check, queen takes b2, and black's absolutely fine. Black's actually better here. So it seems there's actually no real point in this particular situation to play a4. Black does, with best play at least, have great ways of creating counterplay here, especially with f4 being played, and that's typical actually when Capablanca suspects there's king weaknesses. It does, that does give special licenses, but that's behind the scenes. So a4 is not really that great. So bishop f3 is played, knight h, f6. Now a4 here, actually, here. So is this slightly different? We see actually a very interesting move, c4. This gives the c5 square to black. Bishop e3, queen c7, and now g4. This is very, very, committal, burning the bridges, so to speak. It's either going to be a win or a loss with such a move, because there are a lot of weaknesses creeping in. More likely to be a win or a loss at least. We see knight c5, g5, knight fd7, f5, a lot of pawn moves and a lot of weaknesses which need to be looked after potentially. Rook fe8. And now bishop f4. This actually makes things a little bit worse than they needed to be, it seems. Bishop f2, there is knight b3, and this position, knight dc5. So here, even if f6, this isn't so bad for black at all. It looks as though, hold on, this bishop doesn't seem great. The thing is, if we look at this with bishop c8, bishop h3, queen d7, you can see that actually, hold on, g5 is a bit loose here. There's things like queen f5 coming in. You can see that there's quite a responsibility here being demonstrated. If knight takes c4, queen f5, taking out g5 and f6 to drop, it's difficult, it seems, for White to kind of hold on to things here potentially in this scenario. What does White want to do? White can't really move the bishop without dropping e3. So, this would be like a disconnected pawn chain. This is what I mean. This is quite committal stuff, leaving potential weaknesses behind. So, so bishop f4, though, is played. it's a bad position. Bishop e5. It turns out knight e5 looks as though it's asking for trouble with f6, but actually, this would also be good for black. For example, here with knight d3, rook e5, d5 is being disconnected to some extent, and in fact black could even play an exchange sack and end up being with huge compensation here for the exchange. All of these light square weaknesses around the king, it's a great way to underline king safety issues. Black's actually much better there. But anyway, knight e5 is more complex than bishop e5. No need to do that sort of stuff. We have bishop g4, knight b3, f takes, h takes. The only perk of this really, okay, it looks at d7, but sometimes black might be able to play king g7 and rook h8 on a good day. We see rook b1. Now here, bishop takes c3 is played. This looks like a bit of controversy. Players with fianchettos, don't usually like giving them up because it creates potential, weaknesses around the place. But here it's not really that easy for white to exploit these weaknesses, and it has dismantled d5 a bit. Queen c5 check might even be a more precise move order to then play bishop takes c3. This is really engine-approved stuff, just taking out d5. But bishop takes c3 first, queen c5 check, we have e3 here. Okay, so after this move, we can't take on d5 because the knight's hanging. So knight e5 keeps the pressure on the d5 pawn. Yeah, if we take on d5, white doesn't allow even queen h1, white just takes the queen off, and then bishop takes d7. So safety point, knight e5, safeguard the knight, hits the bishop as well. I mean, the queen's protecting, but d5 is vulnerable, and the knight can gobble on f3 at bishop f3 to be able to take on d5. So we have bishop f3, but in fact, Capablanca is not even showing interest in the d5 pawn. He actually plays knight d3. This is really a fascinating position. So it does introduce a threat of knight takes f4 because of the pinned pawn. So the two knights side by side there aesthetically, and it's here, and it disconnects d5. We have king h1. It's a very tricky position indeed. If rook takes b3, knight takes f4, and then e3 is really weak, as well as d5, as well as the rook hanging. So king h1 is tried, but now bishop takes d5. We have rook takes b3, which makes things worse, but it's already bad. If queen c2, just queen c6 is powerful. For example, queen g2, bishop e4. Black is well entrenched here in this position. And for example, this situation is just really nice for black. Black's getting a dominating position. Can even use the a file. This is just the scenario, fictional scenario, where black's absolutely crushing it. So anyway, queen c2, yeah, it doesn't help. Queen c6 is a lot of pressure to bear. So okay, rook takes b3 is tried. Knight takes f4. In this position, c takes is also strong. If queen takes d3, there's bishop c4, and bishop takes f1. Yeah, and this is really tricky just from this passed pawn point of view. If queen takes c3, and this passed pawn is really dangerous. And if queen takes b3, yeah, black's crushing it there. Also, bishop takes f3 was possible. It just shows how strong the black position is. So anyway, knight takes f4 immediately. Rook b1. If rook takes b6, that's a desperado style move. Bishop takes f3, queen takes f3, queen takes b6, queen takes f4. There is queen b7 check, nifty, protecting f7 with check. Then rook e5, black's just much better here. So for example here, it's centralizing, it's great for black. So rook b1, we have rook takes e3, yeah, white's being dismantled. That vacuum of weaknesses has been exposed from all those pawn moves earlier. Knight g2, and guess what Capablanca plays here, which helpfully simplifies greatly actually. So rook takes f3, well done, 10 points. Rook takes f3, knight takes g2, more simplification. Rook e8, king f1, bishop takes f3, so queen and rook each, but this is absolutely winning for black after taking on g5. 3 pawns up right now. And we have rook e1, this is lost basically a lost position. It's pointless to take on b6. The king's going to be in big trouble as well. There's lots of things going on there. So rook e1, rook takes, king takes, queen g1 check, king d2, queen takes h2 check, king c1, queen e5, king b2, king g7, queen f2, b5, queen b6, b takes a4, queen takes a6, queen e2 check, end of game. Yeah, I mean, there's so many pawns down for white. It's there's no real hope here at all. And there are things like it's just going to be torture after queen d3, for example, which would hold d6 and hit c3. Yeah, so white didn't play on from here. You know, this just looks like it's just going to be pure torture. It's just completely lost. So anyway, there's no real need for explanation there. So anyway, what do we get from this game? I think there is a justification for being a little bit cynical about this game. From an engine accuracy perspective, sure, Capablanca's accuracy is really amazing if you look at it from modern engines. Hardly any centre pawn loss, you know, hardly any significant mistakes, basically, in normal human language. Yeah. So yeah, hardly any significant mistakes. And white, though, plays a little bit like a caveman with moves like f4, all these committal pawn moves, and then g4. It's like caveman creating weaknesses all around the place, with his, you know, the pawn structure being torn apart. Basically, bishop takes c3 was a nice kind of specific move just to weaken white here. Nice to get out of danger, but yeah, d5, a disconnected pawn, nicely entrenched. It's just a crushing position here, going downhill with both knights there asphatically side by side, and it's working out in the variations very, very nicely here because knight takes f4 threat. A wonderful game in basically what looks to be a modern Benoni. You know, Mikhail Tal would be pretty happy with this opening and game, I feel. So yeah, great stuff. But yeah, was Alexander Alekhine playing a bit riskier than usual? And if that's the case, maybe he also played other games not to his full strength, just to give the impression he's a real bunny that Capablanca will just wipe out. There are many advantages if that is the case for doing that, just to make sure Capablanca's preparation before the upcoming World Championship match is not that serious, is not that intense. Not that Capablanca was known necessarily as a major hard worker, but rather lazy and invincible. I'm quoting that as an expression of Capablanca. I don't think he is lazy necessarily. His annotations often penetrate, you know, quite sharply, even into opening sequences if you look at chess fundamentals. But anyway, from the evidence of this game, it looks as though Capablanca's in a different league. So is a full sense of security being given? This is kind of art of war tactics to kind of confuse the opponent. If the opponent, if you're going east, you know, go west. If you're going, you know, to give the opposite impression to the enemy, basically. If your opponent's small, you know, make it look large. If you're large, make it look small. It's that one in particular of relevance here. Alekhine's made to look like a bunny here. You know, has he done it on purpose with all these committal pawn moves? So interesting prelude to the upcoming World Championship match later that year. So okay, interesting game, Benoni style, from a Queen's engine initially. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much.